Okay, really important guest coming up here. We have George Barna, Director of Research and Cultural Research Center at ACU, Arizona Christian University. George, welcome to the program. George, please inform our audience and take some time to go into the findings of the survey that you publicized yesterday regarding Christians and their perspective on this election, please.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. As we look at what's coming up in the election, what we're finding is much lower enthusiasm about the election among people of faith, which is leading to a projection that we're going to have tens and tens of millions of devoted Christians who intend not to vote. So you can look at theologically defined born-again Christians. We're expecting that there will be about 41 million theologically defined born-again Christians who aren't going to bother to vote. Now, when you look at turnout levels, when you look at vote projection levels, that's a game changer right there. And when you look at who those people would be likely to vote for, by a large margin, they would back Mr. Trump. By their refusal to show up in this election, what that basically says is that Mr. Trump is going to be very, very hard-pressed to win. That's a segment that he's been able to rely on in his prior to election campaigns, but he can't really rely on them now. Now, one of the things that the survey showed is that part of the reason for that is that the churches that people of faith that regularly attending self-identified Christians, theologically defined born-again Christians, people attending evangelical churches, these were all the groups we were looking at where we've got tens of millions who are not going to vote. Well, we looked at what are their churches doing about the election, and what we discovered is that by and large, their churches don't want to get involved. What we found is that only 56% of Christian churches in the country have even bothered to encourage their people to vote. Now, we did other questions in the survey that found that that would motivate a large number, millions and millions of Christians. It would motivate them to vote if their pastor simply said, look, voting is a responsibility of a responsible Christian. And so I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, but I'm going to tell you, do your homework, check with the scriptures to see what the Bible teaches about the issues, pick the appropriate candidate and vote. That would bring out tens of millions more Christian voters. And yet our pastors aren't even willing to do that. So we've really got to pull it together in these last few weeks of the election where Christians can make a huge difference, either by staying home or by actually voting intelligently.
There's a lot there. And so I want to first ask, how does the enthusiasm that you are measuring and modeling compare to prior presidential elections?
Well, we have this algorithm that we use to predict turnout that's based on a number of factors. And so we look at things like interest in the election, intent to vote, knowledge about the voting process, knowledge about the candidates, those types of things. And what we're seeing is that all of those measures are down from prior years compared to 2020, where we had an unusually high amount of interest in almost all of those indices. What we're seeing is we're probably down between 5 to 10 percentage points in each of those measures. So that's what's contributing to the decline in projected turnout. In the last election, we had about 61% of voting age adults who turned out. We're projecting that in this election, that's going to drop from 61 to somewhere down to 53 to 55%.
So let me ask, though, if the general population will decrease from 61 to 53 to 55, are evangelicals down more than other voters? Because if evangelicals decrease in enthusiasm alongside the general population, then it will basically be a wash. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, that would be the best case scenario at this point. Right now, what we're seeing is that people who are committed Christians, biblical Christians, disciples of Jesus, evangelicals, sage gods, the spiritually active, governance-engaged, conservative Christians, whichever those segments you want to look at, what we're finding is anywhere from 10 to 25 percentage point drops in enthusiasm about this election, in likelihood to turn out for this election. So yeah, if it were a wash, I wouldn't be as concerned. It's not. We're dropping at greater levels, and that's what's raising the alarm.
So you say 41 million who will not vote. I want you to also explain in your survey, you explore as to why. What are the reasons that born-again, Bible-believing, church-attending Christians, many of whom have kids and families that will have to live with the consequence of this election, what are the reasons they give you as to why they will not vote?
Well, what we're hearing from about 2/3 of them is that they're just not interested in politics, or they're not interested in this election. We've got a majority of them also saying that they dislike both of the major party candidates. We've got a majority of them saying they don't feel that either of those candidates represents their most important personal views on issues in the election. About half of them are saying that they don't feel that their vote will make a difference anyway. We've got half of them saying that the election is too controversial. They don't want to get involved. By the way, we're finding that born-again Christians are less likely than any other group that we're studying to talk to people who they believe will vote differently or think differently than them about the election. They don't want to even bring it up in discussion. And so they're really distancing themselves from the possibility of being influential in this election. And then you've got almost half of them who are saying it wouldn't matter if I voted because the election is rigged anyway. And you've got about half of them who say, and I can't get accurate information about the candidates, so I don't really know what I need to know about the two candidates.
So I guess a question I have, George, is how much of this would you say is because church attendance has declined and the church is not as strong as it was before all of the lockdowns?
Charlie, I think that contributes to it, but I don't think we can only point our finger at the decline in church attendance. I mean, what we're finding is among people who are regularly attending Christian churches, we're finding that 32 million of those people say that they're not going to turn out to vote. And when we talk with those people, they're telling us, well, the church isn't saying anything about the election. They're not encouraging me to vote. They're not giving me information about what the Bible has to say about the issues that are relevant to the election so that I can choose the appropriate candidate. So it's a mixture of, some people are dropping out of church, but among the Christians who are still attending church, they're not being advised that it's a Christian's responsibility to vote in an election, that we're called to be agents of influence in our culture, in every dimension of that culture, and that includes politics and government and public policy, whether we like it or not. Maybe we don't like business, but we're called to be influential in business. Maybe we don't want to dirty our hands with what's going on at school board meetings and in public schools, but we're called to be influential players in that because those places are influencing the worldview of our children, a worldview that they're going to take with them for the rest of their life. So it doesn't matter whether you enjoy the process of being a cultural influencer. God has called us to play that role. And so whether we like it or not, we better do our homework, put on our big boy pants, and get in the game.
I have a text from a pastor yesterday who refuses to vote or get his friends to vote, saying that we must punish Trump and punish Harris for not being biblical and not being engaged with biblical worldview issues. I have the text right here. It's awfully sanctimonious. George, I just want to repeat one thing you said earlier so that people can absorb it, because I think it's very important. If your numbers remain the same and there's no improvement and there's no surge in enthusiasm, is it fair to say that Christians staying at home will hand the White House to Kamala Harris?
Yes, I believe that's exactly what's going to happen. Well, again, when you look at who the different segments of the population would vote for, if they would vote, what we see is that the born-again Christians, the Christians who are churched, the people who attend evangelical churches who are planning not to vote, by large margins, more than 20 percentage point difference, they would be voting for Mr. Trump. So by staying home, they are essentially saying, we're fine with Kamala Harris winning the presidency. We're fine with the Democrats taking over the Senate and the House in next January. We're absolutely fine with school boards across the country putting in people who would have an agenda to indoctrinate our children with unbiblical perspectives. And let me also just say, because it burns me up, that email that you got from the pastor saying we need to punish Trump and Harris because they're taking unbiblical views. I'd love to ask that pastor, so what are you doing with the people in your pews to punish them who don't have a biblical worldview? Because my research shows that in churches all over the country, a majority of people, Bible-believing churches, allegedly Bible-believing churches, whether they're evangelical, whether they're fundamentalists, whether they're charismatic, whether they're independent, whether they're Bible churches, across the board, we're showing that large majorities of the people sitting in our churches week after week do not have a biblical worldview. What's the pastor going to do about that?
Well said, George Barna. Come back anytime. As George Barna said it crisply, if his data is correct, even a little bit off, Christians will hand the White House to Kamala Harris on a silver platter. And we know what happens after that. It's on the church. And right now the church is giving the keys to the kingdom to Kamala Harris. George, thank you so much.
Hey everybody, Charlie Kirk here. You've asked and MyPillow listened. They're finally bringing you the most requested offer at $5 and early 1998.
Random schlep that George Barna.
Order today. Use promo code Kirk at checkout. That is promo code Kirk at MyPillow.com. Check it out right now. Wonderful organization, MyPillow.com.
Okay, I want to riff a little bit on that conversation we just had. So that is not just some random schlep that we put up on the screen and an interview with. That is one of the most reputable and respected pollsters and market researchers in the country when it comes to the Christian population. George Barna has been doing this for over 40 years. Of course, he started the Barna Group. He sold it. He has authored well over 50 books. He is proven time and time again to pinpoint with chilling accuracy the enthusiasm and the energy of the Christian community when it comes to politics. Now, could he be right? We don't know for sure, but he's not just talking out of his tail here. This is a guy that has a long track record to show that when George Barna warns you about something, you better listen. And I have a group text message of these wonderful pastors that I just adore, many of whom are just so livid with Trump. And I think they're going to vote for Trump, but they're certainly not going to speak on behalf of him. They're certainly not going to say anything positive. They're not going to mobilize their congregation when in prior election cycles in 2020 and 2016 they would have. So what is going on here? Well, number one, there is some consternation, somewhat understandably, but not really, about the abortion thing. I get it. I'm 100% pro-life. I wish the country was more pro-life. So a lot of people are emphasizing that issue. Secondly, a lot of the George Soros-funded evangelical propaganda is wearing people down. It's wearing weak Christians down. And most importantly, pastors are not leading their flock in a biblical manner. But here's the truth on the pro-life thing. This is the most important election if you are pro-life. This is the first time there are serious pro-life laws that will be repealed if Kamala wins. You realize that if Kamala wins, the serious pro-life laws in Oklahoma, in Georgia, will be gone. And unfortunately, many of the pastors I talk to, they say, so what? Doesn't matter. So I say, what kind of point are you trying to make here? Do you actually want to protect the unborn? Or are you just trying to say that you're a better Christian than Donald Trump? Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, North Dakota will all be gone. The majority of American pastors are not speaking out at all on this election. They won't speak out against the trans mutilation of our kids. They won't speak out on the 320,000 kids being sex trafficked. They won't speak out on our open borders. They won't speak out about the wars that are happening. I thought it was a specific scripture, blessed are the peacemakers. Most pastors couldn't care less about that. Most pastors are too busy expanding their wardrobe budget to be much bigger than their book budget. They run churches that are much closer to auditoriums of motivational speakers, speeches that look like TED Talks with a rock concert, organized parking, and good coffee. You see, the problem here is that the American church has not been a strong, resolute organization for quite some time. It is afraid. And I've visited a lot of these churches. They're terrified. And so here's the reality. If American Christians do not wake up and pastors do not boldly speak out every Sunday from now to the election, this country might be lost. This last weekend, a clip was sent to me of an amazing priest in Scottsdale, Arizona, Father Klein, spoke out for 15 minutes about the slaughter of the unborn and why Christians need to rise up and vote this election. God bless him. Father Klein, Scottsdale, Arizona, St. Bernadette Church. He did a great job. It could not have been a better homily. There are a lot of pastors doing the right job, the right work. But George Barna is not just some rando that we put on here. This guy's been doing it for 40 years. God revealed himself in Butler. How many times do we need to emphasize that there are civilizational defining issues on this? And if we lose, it'll be largely because pastors and Christians arrogantly say to God, we don't care. We're more religious than Donald Trump. I hope they enjoy the gulags. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. Email us as always, freedom@charliekirk.com. Thanks so much for listening, and God bless.